Okay. I thought I'd just make a bit of a video talking about auction sites and stuff like that. Particularly dealing with trucks and heavier equipment and whatnot. I sort of occasionally look on one site, and I've been looking quite a few times more recently, dealing with like just looking through trucks and stuff like that, and vans as well. And there's a few things I tend to notice now. Plenty of you guys have got far more experience with eBay and stuff like that than I have. My sister tells me you always go in and make a bid in the closing seconds of an auction and all that in a chance to try and outbid everybody else. And I tend to notice on these sites that not a lot of stuff happens. You know, when they're first on there, it's only within the last 2 days that anything even gains any traction price-wise. But there's a couple of other things I've noticed, and a few bits and pieces just that I've, been told by the boss at work involving trucks and stuff like that. And yeah, one thing I do have a look at on occasion is cranes and forklifts. Now, as plenty of you know, I've spent years driving forklifts. I have a crane license as well. Not a full-blown one, it's just a Dogman's one, but I spent about 1.5 years using gantry cranes and stuff like that, and yard cranes, mobile cranes, and whatnot. One thing that, with cranes, if you've got a telescopic one, that the boom goes out into multiple lengths, they've got rollers inside them, and it's best not to go telescoping it with much weight, or not to telescope it much at all, because apparently the rollers inside the telescopic part wears out. One guy told me that you're better actually to lift the boom higher and drop the stuff down with your standard, cables that connect to your main hook. You're best to let that out and lift the boom up higher to bring something closer to you, and vice versa to move something further away, lift it up and lower it down. To move something further away from you than actually use the telescopics inside it, because the rollers in there, they wear out when you're moving them with weight on them, and they are astronomically priced to replace. As some of you guys may know, I've been involved in, well, it's an old backhoe my uncle used to own, that was, well, quite literally just sitting where the wood heaps are sitting now, actually just in front of that. And as much as leaking hydraulics may be a pain in the arse, they're actually shockingly simple to fix if you can get hold of a bizarre little spanner, which you could probably make up if you got half a brain, and you have a blowtorch and you know how to harden steel. And damn it, certain weed there that I had real troubles with this stuff up at my other property. Jojo / Bindi. Bastard, I've got some of that down on the, over the edge of the hill, right way down the bottom. Yeah, mongrels come up here. Anyway, back to the point. If you... They've basically got a little bit that's got to be unscrewed, and where you got your main shaft that comes down, you've got your dust seals and your oil seals and all that sort of crap, and there's a bit there that shaft goes in and out of that you can actually unscrew. And once you get that out, you'll notice there's a series of rings. You'll need a hell of a big socket to be able to undo the thing that holds those rings, and you can take those rings in. And you may think, oh, this is going to be a nightmare. We had some massive booms on that thing. The arm on this will reach out 26.6 foot from the machine. No joke. 26.6 foot reach. And the rings in it, you know, big rings are like, about 5 inches across, 4 or 5 inches across, more like 5. $55 to do that for one ram. If you have somebody who is a diesel mechanic or whatever, they'll probably show you how to do it, because it's a lot easier than you may think it is. And of course, you've got to undo your pin that goes through to hold your bucket and all that. But I sometimes look at some of these cranes and you think, well, even if they've got bad rams in them, and there's one that was missing a ram altogether. Apparently, it's not that hard to get rams themselves individually, you know. And so long as you've got one that fits the right pins and is going to hold an equivalent weight of what it's got to handle, yeah, you'd be right. But if you've got one that leaks oil like a bloody sieve, it's very cheap to fix them. But anyway, on to trucks and vans. One thing I tend to notice is there's some things that re-come up. Now, this auction site has the ability to set a reserve price. Now, of course, that means that it basically has a $9 starting price. So if it's unreserved, there's $9 on it. Sometimes I think it wouldn't be a terribly stupid idea just to bid $9 for everything. I've seen spools of optic fibre used for what I can only assume is internet cabling, and nobody even put a bid in for them, yet the spool itself is huge. You just about house a Chinese family inside it. And then you got miles of this optic fibre, but nobody even put a bid in. There's a lot of gates and fences and just outright piping, galvanised piping, so nobody even bids on it. Tins of paint, you know, and a lot of these are varying conditions. You don't know what they're going to be like, but nobody even bids. But some of these things, they have a reserve price on. Now, usually things at auctions, as you guys might know if you've been in all this sort of stuff, you get everything for fucking peanuts. 20 to 25% the price is normal. Don't be surprised if you only pay 15% the going rate. And when people put a reserve price on, they put it like a bloody car yard sort of price on, and it'll get 0 bids. It'll just get nothing. Often enough, you'll see it in there again next week. Now, this is the big secret about seeing stuff next week. There's a few little traps in all of this that you got to know to avoid getting screwed. And when you see something come up with a high reserve price and there's 0 bids, you might see it come up next week. And that's no big deal if it never got bidded on to begin with. But if it does get bidded on a number of times and then it gets sold, and then a week later you see the same truck. Now, here's a dead giveaway with trucks. With a Pantech, they'll write a company name on the side. And often enough, the photos and the description will be identical. There may be one of several things that's happened. The most obvious thing is the person who bidded on it didn't actually turn up to pay the money or didn't pick it up. However, that option, although it may be the case, buyer beware. I would say it wouldn't necessarily be the case, because some of these things will appear next week or 2 weeks after, and you just look. You can look at 2 main things: the name that's written on the side of the truck and the kilometres that are shown for that truck. Generally speaking, they will use the identical photos and the identical description. But if they don't, if it's re-put in, you'll notice that the kilometres or the miles are the same amount. And if there's any company name on it, you'll recognise, bang, I've seen that one with that company name before. And that's where it gets a little bit sticky, because if they did pay for it and pick it up and it ends up there 2 weeks later on the same auction site, you know what? There's something going on with it. What I mean by that is it is close to impossible to register the damn thing. Now, this usually means there's something serious. Something whereby you've bought it, you've given it a look online, or you might have even gone there in person and given it a quick look. You've bought it, you've got it back, you've started to have a look at what needs to be done. Basically, as we do over here in Australia, you take it in for a roadworthy. And the first thing that will happen when you take it in for a roadworthy is they will check it over and check all the standardised stuff they're supposed to check. And in that, they write you up a little report, and it tells you what you need to replace. And usually they actually have it on official government, state roads department letterhead. They go and write up a little report of all the things that need doing on it. And then you go away and you do all those things, and they recheck all those same points. And if you've done them all correctly, then they'll be fine. And if you face what I faced, which is I had a mate who had a windscreen joint and wasn't making much money replacing windscreens, and they were exceedingly fussy about a windscreen that I couldn't see a problem with, and it was like, if you're going to get this roadworthy, you've got to use our mate, otherwise the roadworthy's not going to go through. And I basically got trapped in that, but I got a car on the road anyway, even though I had to pay another $150 that I probably didn't need to. But anyway, these guys that give roadworthy certificates out, if they screw up big time, they can actually lose their licence for it. So they're, we'll admit, I know one that will write up a roadworthy without barely giving a shit, and you can get it on the road, but then he tells you, well, you've got to fix these things after you got it on the road, but at least now it's on the road, you can use it to drive to work or whatever. That's kind of illegal, but there's quite a few different ones in different places that do that. But generally speaking, you'll take it in for a roadworthy certificate and they'll look all over it, and anything that's fucked up that needs to be up to standard, they will write down. They may also verbally tell you, or also maybe write down, even on the official paper, something that is seriously wrong with it. Things that are not really repairable. Reminds me a little bit of Said House's foundations. Things like a cracked chassis. And technically you could do something about it, but it is going to cost you so bloody much that it's going to cost you more than what you've already paid for it. And effectively speaking, it's easier just to go out there and buy another one than it is to have a professional welder, like a bit Welder CSR. Some of you guys watch him, you know, professional welder with all the tickets and all the licenses, who can fix up major screw-ups in earth-moving equipment and stuff like that. And he could weld a chassis up. But sometimes with things, particularly vans, they're by the time you have somebody who's competent, then you have basically an engineer look at it and pass an engineer's certificate on it after they possibly do one of those X-ray crack tests on the weld and all this sort of. By the time you do all that, the cost of the damn thing is going to be more than the vehicle itself. And it's not worth it with vans, and sometimes with the price these trucks are going, it's not worth it with the trucks either. And there is cases of that. Now, I'm probably not supposed to talk about this, but I don't suppose you'd mind anyway. But there's one at work where they've faced a lot of bullshit. He spent a lot of money, put a lot of money onto this vehicle, got everything fixed up, all the electricals fixed up on it, repainted the thing, new tyres and a whole shebang, and got it registered and roadworthy first and then registered. All went without a problem at all. Then he's been interstate and he's had some arsehole cop come up and claim that, and it's technically true if you look at it, the Pantech, which is your big box on the back, is 18 inches longer than the chassis is. And if you have a look at it, you can actually see, yeah, that's true. But the question is, how the bloody thing get roadworthy and past that, and then when you go to get the number plates on it, when you get it registered, they will actually check your engine numbers right and your VIN number and all that stuff, and they write that down on the paperwork. They, even write down the colour of the vehicle, and they give you the number plates, and you've basically got to attach the number plates to it in front of the person at the state roads office. You've got to have a cordless drill and a few screws ready to do it. And that's not optional. You can't drive it off with no plates. You've got to put the plates on right then and there. And these guys, in due course, they have a look at these things. Car, not so much a truck. If it's something obviously wrong, they're going to notice. And that's when these dudes who give out the roadworthy certificates lose their license to give out roadworthy certificates. This thing went through roadworthy certificate, went through registration, and now this cop's pulled it up and realised that the Pantech's 18 inches longer. So either you modify the whole Pantech, which probably ain't going to happen. I don't even know if that's an option. Or you've got to extend the chassis 18 inches, which means welding another piece on. But when you do that, you're also going to have to look at the rest of the structure of the chassis. He's not sure. He hasn't looked underneath with a torch, but there may be a little bit of rust in that chassis. And if there is rust, then you've got to get that rust out, which means cutting it out, putting another piece in that's an identical size and thickness, welding that in, grinding it back level with how it originally was, getting an engineer's certificate on it, blah, blah, and it's going to have that for the 18-inch extension anyway, have an engineer's certificate and more welded on. And the truck's built in 1985, and it's done a massive amount of miles. And at the end of the day, it's probably not worth it. And it's sort of unfortunate that he put so much money into getting everything else done on it and spray painting the whole thing and everything, and he's driven it for 2 years or something, and then after all that effort to make it better than some of the other ones that he's got, bang, it's taken off the bloody road. So it's one of these things, some of these ones that come back up, long story short, don't touch them with a 40-foot pole, because what's happened is these people have got these trucks, they've taken them to get a roadworthy certificate, at which point they realise the chassis is cracked. They realise something else. Like with this one, they'll give you the key and you can unlock the door and have a look at it, and I'm pretty certain that you can actually start it. They don't necessarily, sometimes they'll say it starts in a roundabout way, i.e. smoky exhaust, then the vehicle runs. Usually they only write down if the engine turns over with yes or no. And you'll see ones that haven't got a very high bid price, and it might say something like engine missing, or something like that. There's one that I saw there that went pretty cheap. There's an old one. They had no keys at all for it. No ignition, no nothing. So, but these things are usually listed in the description. But there may be other things that even if you get the key from the office and inspect it in person, and you look underneath and, oh yeah, the chassis looks good, blah, blah, everything seems good. You get the key, you start it, the battery's not flat, it does have some fuel in it, and it runs. Then you'll get it out on the road and you'll find out that the clutch is stuffed. Now, if you ever see trucks pulling off, particularly big rigs, pulling off from the lights, and you see the blah, 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 they sort of do that shuddering thing, means the clutch is fucked, needs another clutch. And, they might get in it and find that the clutch is shaking like hell, the gearbox is really completely screwed, but you can't drive these things off-site. You've got to stay exactly where they are, and while they might start it and say, well, the engine's running beautifully, no smoke, it's all looking good, no big deal. They may find that the battery's flat and they can't start it. Or they may start it and find the engine's perfect and then get it out on the road with their trader plates or their temporary rego plates, which is temporary rego paperwork, which is what civilians like me have used a number of times for different vehicles. As they're driving it home, they realise the gearbox is absolutely stuffed. you know, or the range won't change, so they're stuck in low range, and and you're stuck going 25 k's, 30 k's an hour home on a 100 k an hour freeway because you can't get it to change into high range. This is the sort of things, and that's some of the reasons why you see this thing 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later on the same site. So anyway, I just thought I'd explain all that. I have seen some things going really cheap. I've seen some stuff at, I'll say it, Kia trucks, 2010, major steering fault. You could barely keep the bloody thing straight on the road. The steering box was destroyed at 6 years old. There's another one that's very noisy at idle. That's a 2011 Kia. If you're going to deal with trucks and cars too, don't touch Kia. Simply put. There's and I'll tell you another thing. Mercedes-Benz's boss had a van. It was a Mercedes-Benz van because not only is he a removalist, he's got another side business, and they have a couple of vans for that. And a year or so back, he had one that was a Mercedes-Benz. Bought the thing for 12 grand? No, bought it for 14 grand, spent 8 grand on it, so it cost him 22,000, and then he sold it for 12 grand. He said the Mercedes-Benz's, the parts are so expensive and they're heaps of shit, and you go and, you know, Mercedes-Benz used to be very good prior to about 95 as the cut-off point. 1995, that's a year when they all started to turn bad. And, you know, he poured $22,000 into this thing to basically sell it for 12 or 10 or something, and he lost 10 or 12 grand in the process. And, you know, massive heap of stuff he ended up having to fix up on it and whatnot, and I think he got to drive it for about a year, but in that year, you know, everything seemed to stuff up and he had to fix so much of it, and he said, never again am I buying a Mercedes-Benz. And I know the Piggery had a couple of those, and I know there's one at the nursery I was at, and I'll tell you what is it with car manufacturers who can't line the door up with the seat? You go to hop in, and most cars you open the door and the seat's just lined up and you hop straight in. You go to hop in this and you go, ooh, slump yourself beside the seat because the seat was a lot more forwards than where the door was. And the crazy thing about it was I couldn't put the seat back any further. And stupid blooming gear stick, like a dick sticking out of the dashboard, stuck right up in front of you. The hardest bloody clutch to let out. You could never let it out gently because it was so highly sprung. It's a very stiff clutch. And the gearbox, you'd have to literally, you go to put it in gear and you'd have to literally just bang, slam it upwards to change it into gear. It was the stiffest gearbox and the stiffest blooming clutch I'd ever come across, and I made a decision there. There's no way in hell that I'm ever having a Mercedes-Benz commercial if this is how they are, you know, and tell you what, they're not terribly great at all, regardless of the fact the Piggery seem to like buying them on a regular basis. But anyways, it's just my little blurb on not getting burnt on auction sites buying trucks, and some of the things that you could do involving fixing up cranes and the like.